up, guys? Welcome to the Endless Endeavor podcast with me, Greg Anderson. This is going to be episode 12. I know we've had a couple mishaps over the last couple episodes where we had to restructure what number it was based on just trying to get things out to you guys in a time-sensitive manner. But we're back on track now. This is going to be episode 12, and I have my best friend with me right here. It's Dr. Brian Scheele. We've mentioned him before on some previous episodes, and people have shown interest in hearing his perspectives and kind of hearing about what he went through with the COVID pandemic working out there in New York. So we just got done climbing Glacier Peak out in the remote Washington wilderness and got back, the day before yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
And got all situated, rested for a day, and now we're going to hit the podcast. So go ahead, Brian, just introduce yourself, give them a little bit about your background, and we'll just go from there.
Hey, bro. Thanks for having me on here. So, yeah, I'm Dr. Brian Scheele, but really I'm just Brian or Scheele. Greg and I have known each other since we were young men growing up in Snohomish, Washington. We both went our different ways. I went off and became an athlete and went to college and traveled the world for a while before becoming a park ranger doing high altitude rescue. Eventually, I ended up going to medical school, becoming an emergency medicine physician. I'm sure we'll get into a couple of those details. I mean, these days, doing emergency medicine and some humanitarian and disaster relief work. Like Greg mentioned, during the peak of the COVID pandemic in New York City, was fortunate enough to be able to go to New York City and see the run up to the peak in cases and deaths in Queens, before, during, and after the peak, which was the United States' worst caseload and death load during this pandemic. I'm not sure if it competes with what it was like in Wuhan, because you can't particularly get real numbers out of Wuhan, but that was an interesting time, which we may talk about here. And then, we just got out of the wilderness. We just wanted to go out and check ourselves one time. We hadn't been out climbing. I guess we climbed Rainier a couple years ago. We used to climb Rainier all the time. And I think we did a 36 or 40 mile round trip up Glacier Peak, which is one of the stratovolcanoes in Washington State. It's always good to get out, push yourself a bit, get some altitude in.
Yeah, that climb was good, man. And it's funny, you used to ask me to climb Rainier with you a lot when you were working on Rainier doing high altitude mountain rescue. And it was right after I got out of the military. And I remember thinking like, dude, I don't want to walk around with weight on my back ever again. I'm good, dude. And I didn't take you up on it for a couple of years. And then I finally got the bug. I was like, you know what? I might as well just go give this a try and see what's up with it. And Rainier was the first mountain that we climbed together, which is the biggest peak in Washington State. And I remember it completely broke me off. And it was like a reality check because you were in good ass mountain shape at the time. And I think, what did we go up on the first time we climbed together? I think we went the ledges. That's
right. It was the Gibraltar ledges
and
from Camp Muir.
I remember after about 12,500 feet, I was completely useless and I felt like I was in one of those Everest documentaries, just putting one foot in front of the other, taking 5 deep breaths and then doing it again. But then we hit the summit and it all clicked. I was like, oh, okay, this is what it's all about. Hours and hours of misery. And then you finally make it. And
halfway. You make it halfway.
Yeah. And man, I don't know if I would say I was hooked, because I remember when I got done, I was like, yep, I don't think I'll be doing that again. But then we kind of make it like an annual trip. We try and hit one mountain a year, and it's usually Rainier. Like Brian said, we've climbed that. I think we've summited 4 times together.
I think we did 4 attempts, 4 summits
and
together.
And then we also climbed 2 times where we failed. So we've done we've done 6 climbs together, 4 summits, 2 failed attempts. But like you said, man, I think it's good to just absolutely push yourself to the brink of your physical capabilities. And it kind of puts things into perspective, and it kind of lets you know where you are, and it also lets you know where you aren't. And we both felt that this weekend. I think Glacier Peak had us logging 38 miles
It's just because we got a little lost.
Yeah,
It would have been
yeah.
36.
Yeah, Ranger can admit he didn't do a very good map recon, and supposed to be a 36-mile round trip, but we got a additional 2 miles for extra credit.
It's pretty though.
But-
yeah, you point out that you learn a little more when you push yourself to the limit, and you know what? I think, although it hurts sometimes not to succeed, but we did 2 winter attempts, and had high hopes, but got wrecked. And those teach you a lesson. I'm trying to think both of them were winter, and both of them were, it was like 80-mile-an-hour winds,
Yeah,
frozen. Those
gnarly.
days, those teach you a lesson. They humble you a bit.
Yeah, it was the one with Brandon and the one with Mike were our 2 failed attempts.
Both were freezing.
And people that haven't spent any time in altitude, and I'm not this well-versed mountaineer. I climb about 1 or 2 mountains a year, but when you're above 10,000 feet and the weather decides it's not going to work out so well, it can get gnarly. It can get gnarly fast. I remember that time with me, you, and Mike, I lost the ability to talk. Like, that's how cold I was.
Yeah, you were able to follow commands, and our good man, Michael Hayden, was a bit hypothermic. But we set up camp. We got warm.
I don't know if we got warm, but we got warm enough to survive
Till morning.
But yeah, just this last weekend at Glacier Peak, we walked ourselves to the point of utter exhaustion, to where I thought we could just keep pushing, and you have more of a logical approach to spending time on the mountain, just because you have so much more experience and seen so many things, and you're like, bro, it's time to set in camp. It's time to get a little bit of sleep. I was like, no, man, we can keep pushing. No, it's time to get some sleep. And that's not because I'm stronger. Brian's actually a much stronger climber than I am. It's just because he understands how to take care of your body better in those kind of environments. And, it's the ranger in me that thinks you can just keep going, but we
could have kept going.
You're right.
Just would have taken a lot longer. Respect yourself. Take a nice nap.
Yeah, we laid down for a few hours and then got back on it. And I wish I'd listened to you a little earlier, because stepping out of camp that next day, I felt fresh. I felt like we just started over. It was actually pretty incredible.
Maybe we get a rainier in before fall gets here.
Yeah, and the other thing, we talked about it off air. Just breathing at high altitude at basically like your lactic threshold, just working as hard as your body can work for 2 days or however many hours that was. And then I went to CrossFit last night, and I could already tell my fitness was increased by a substantial amount.
Yeah, training at altitude, feeling good at altitude makes you an animal.
And so, yeah, it's pretty cool to see how fast physiologically you adapt just from spending time high up like that. But enough on mountaineering. We could do a bunch of podcasts on that, but I think just to keep this show up to date with current events is what I like to do, and talk about what's going on in the world right now. Everybody's interested in the COVID thing, and everybody's interested for obvious reasons, because I don't think there's a person in America that's not impacted to some degree with this. And the reason I wanted to have you on the show and talk about things is because there's no doubt at this point, COVID has been politicized. It's been weaponized. It's hard to get straight answers on things, from social distancing to wearing a mask. And now you got groups of people that are saying the whole thing's a hoax, and the plandemic, and you just see people on the left and the right kind of creating a narrative to fit whatever agenda they're trying to push. And me being more of a conservative right person, I see people within my peer group saying things that I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. My best friend is in New York right now, and it's gnarly out there. And you'd tell me stories about like what you were going through, and the ventilators and all that stuff. So, the thing that's good about this podcast, like Brian said, we've been best friends since we were like 12, I think. I know anything that comes out of your mouth is 100% non-agenda driven, and it's simply your experience. You're going to share with what you think is going on and what you saw with your own two eyes, and hopefully kind of impart some stuff on people that's not, you know, a left or a right agenda. It's just simply what you're facing as a physician.
Yeah, I'll try. So I'm an emergency medicine physician, meaning I work in the emergency department. I did a year of training in surgery, and then I did 3 following years in emergency medicine and residency training. And I got out of medical school in 2013, and I got out of my residency training in 2017. And regarding my experience as an emergency physician, I've deployed with a number of different humanitarian groups throughout Central, South America, Africa, Asia, the Caribbean. I spent some time in Iraq during the Battle of Mosul with a couple different groups, and so I've seen what medicine is like in the developing world, and I've worked in emergency departments in Maryland, in Florida, in Ohio, in California, Arizona, Washington State. I've done event medicine and worked at which is really interesting, at places like Burning Man, where you see a lot of toxicological emergencies. I've taught courses on tactical combat casualty course instructor, basic endovascular skills for trauma instructor, basically the resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion of the aorta. I've worked at a number of different level 1 trauma centers. I've seen a fair amount of emergency medicine in my short career, and before that, I was an EMT. Like we already mentioned, I worked as what we call a mountaineering ranger, a climbing ranger that does search and rescue and pre-hospital care in the high altitude environment on Mount Rainier for a number of years, and a number of different tours on Denali and Denali National Park for the National Park Service. So I've seen emergency and I worked. I flew in the helicopter, doing scene transport and interfacility transport with critical care paramedics and critical care nurses during my residency trainings. I've seen emergency medicine and sickness from a lot of different perspectives, and I really enjoy the practice of emergency medicine, the ability to help people. And when I was actually traveling in India when COVID sort of hit the scene, and it was all these sort of shadowed news reports from China and Wuhan. And some of the fellows I was traveling with throughout India, they were asking me, it went pretty close to Wuhan, they were asking me questions. They're like, hey, is this a big deal? And I said, well, the virus, from what I can tell and what I know about SARS of the past and MERS of the past, similar coronaviruses that they've had come out of China, I knew that it was virulent. In other words, it pretty dangerous. It could kill a lot of people. But what I really saw, what was really impactful, was that this city of roughly 11 million people was completely quarantined. And not only that, the entire state that Wuhan is in was quarantined. And I said to my friends, I said, look, this is the largest quarantine in the history of man, as far as I know. So yeah, it appears to be a big deal. Just from my observation, I'm no politician. I'm not political. Maybe we didn't give it enough credence. The world didn't give it enough credence, but could we have made a difference? I don't know the answer. Could we have done better? Hindsight's 2020. And then it affected me too. I was doing some other things in another country, and the country I was in, they were threatening to stop flights from that country coming back to the United States. And I said, okay, this is coming at me again. I got back to the United States and started working, and all of a sudden people in New York City started getting sick. And I was trying with all my might to cancel all my shifts on the West Coast and in the Southwest, so that I could go out there and help in New York City, because I saw it was starting to get bad. And this is the end of March into April, and it looked like it was going to get really bad. And I was doing everything in my power. I was trying to sign up with every connection I had, with every hospital, every emergency department I could get to, and it was really quite difficult. I was offering my services for free, and then FEMA put out some work, and I got deployed by a group working for FEMA and got deployed to Queens. and I had been fight all day, every day for 2 weeks trying to get out there. And all of a sudden, a guy says, "Hey, man, I can get you out there by Monday." And I think it was Friday. I said, "Let's do it."
So I remember when you did that, because you called me and kind of explained the situation. And the two typical hospitals that you work at it was one in Yakima, Washington, and then down in what city in Arizona?
Northern Arizona.
Northern Arizona. Okay. And everyone thought you were crazy, right? Going to New York.
Most people, that was an interesting time to think about the way others were telling me. I mean, family members, and I've been doing things out of the ordinary for years, climbing big mountains in South America, North America, and Europe and Asia, and doing humanitarian trips, as we mentioned, around the globe during times of war and or disaster. And sometimes people get a little worrisome, but a lot of family members were saying, "Look, don't go. I don't want you to go." I remember, and it's kind of it hits you in the heart when someone you love is like, "Don't go and do this." But I didn't waver. I'm going. I mean, you got a pandemic.
That's always the case with Brian Scheele. You know what? I'll hear what you have to say, and I'm going anyways.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's what makes you you. That's what's awesome about it, But back in I think it's a different thing right now, because everybody's kind of come to the conclusion, if you're young and you're healthy and you're fit, like it's not quite, you're not at the risk that you may have thought you were when this first kicked off. And it was a lot less understood, and you're still like, "You know what? I'm going." And I was like, "All right, man, have fun,"
Yeah, you certainly encouraged it. It was, again, it hurt the heart a little bit to have your family members tell you not to go because they don't want you to die. And I remember I even, I started a trust so that anything I own, which is, not all that much, but could at least be organized if I was to get sick and die. And then, upon arrival in New York City, about a week and a half before the peak of deaths, it was shockingly horrible.
So just walk us through that. Then you got to New York. You were assigned to a hospital in Queens. You show up day one. Kind of what your expectations are, and then also what the experience was like.
Yeah, so I admittedly don't have a lot of expectations when it comes to life. Like nothing is ever as you thought it would be, and so I just know I'll do what I always do. I'm going to go there. I'm going to work as hard as I can. I'm going to try and do everything I possibly can for the people. And I showed up, and they walked me in to do my first shift with what would be my colleague, and it was like a breath of fresh air. I walk in the door. This was scary. So you walk in the door, and here's an emergency department. It's a big urban emergency department, and place is completely packed. Completely packed. There's ambulances coming in the door, one after another. All the walls, every single wall has a bed against it. Boom, boom, boom. The beds are side by side. Boom, 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 boom. Rooms that were supposed to have one person have two or three. The resuscitation area, which is supposed to have one or two beds in it, is packed 8 across. Ding, 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 ding. All the walls lined with chairs, with people sitting in them. Chair, all the way around. Every single person is on, if they're not intubated, which there's 30 or 40 people intubated, which is unbelievable. You have an ICU in your emergency department with 30 or 40 people intubated on mechanical ventilators, and then everybody else in the emergency department. When we counted one time, there was something like 190 in the emergency department, and I think there's 36 beds previously. And on top of that, they have a regular ICU, which now was already expanded to 4 times its regular size. No one could get a bed in the ICU if they weren't intubated. And truth be told, they couldn't get a bed in the ICU until someone upstairs died. And then someone from the emergency department who needed a bed in the ICU got moved upstairs if they survived the time that they were intubated in the emergency department. And this was nonstop. Every single person, not every single person, but nearly everyone was on a nasal cannula with oxygen or a face mask with oxygen if they weren't intubated. They would take the oxygen that was plugged into the wall, they'd take it out and put it into a little splitter that had 8 little splits on it, and people would have chairs next to each other so that they could all get some of that oxygen. It was
So not only like logistically are you guys operating at a level that's almost non-sustainable. You said, what were the numbers again? You had like 120 people and there's supposed to be,
Yeah, like 100. There was 189, I think, the day I remember
and it's
counting
outfitted for 30 something.
Yeah.
Okay. So not only just the logistics and the space and the equipment, but what about the staff? I mean,
So the staff, the local staff, I was the first doc that got placed from out of state, because I was willing to go in a split second. A couple more docs showed up after me to try and relieve some of the people who'd been there through this build up towards the peak, and then the nursing staff, a lot of them had gotten out sick from COVID, and they had flown in a bunch of nurses from around the country. But I mean, they were overwhelmed. I mean, if you ever want to talk about overwhelming the emergency department, New York City was overwhelmed. Totally overwhelmed. Was it every single part of New York City? Nah, there were some suburban boroughs that were not as overwhelmed, but they're in Queens and Manhattan and Brooklyn, and primarily Queens and Brooklyn were completely overwhelmed. I mean, they were so overwhelmed. And that was the big concern. We're going to overwhelm the emergency departments. And it was overwhelmed. I mean, I wouldn't wish this upon anyone. It was horrible.
and how long of a period would you say that the hospital was just operating at max capacity like that?
Probably over a month, maybe 6 weeks. I don't know the exact dates. I mean, from the time I was there for roughly a full month, and it was starting to get that way the few weeks prior to my arrival. And now, so in New York City, and I'm no epidemiologist, but in New York City, what I believe happened was the virus started to spread throughout the city. It's one of the most densely packed, if not the most densely packed city in the United States, certainly the largest city in the United States. They travel in subways. Everybody was doing their normal thing. And then all of a sudden they realized, look, this is starting to get bad. The thing is, coronavirus takes, once it affects you, if it's going to make you ill, it doesn't make everybody ill, but if it's going to make you ill, it has a lag on it. And it's 7 days, 10 days before you're going to start to present to an emergency department. So it was spreading in the community. And then they put a lockdown on everything. And they said, everyone stay home, only essential workers. And so
it was too late at that point then.
Yeah, it was too late. It was, in hindsight, it was too late. And now the thing that, it amazed me how New York City, they all shut down. There was very few people in the streets when this was horrible. And I mean, you could drive across town in 15, 20 minutes, which, I'm not a New Yorker, but people tell me you would never do that drive. And if you did, it'd take you 90 minutes or 2 hours. And I could stay in Brooklyn and drive to Queens, and it was easy. It was to the point where everybody in the emergency department, not everybody, but people were dying all day. They were dying all day. You couldn't save them all. You certainly tried. You did every single thing we could. They were previously stating that we couldn't use non-invasive positive pressure. We couldn't use BiPAP. We couldn't use positive pressure ventilation, which is like a mask on your face, or high flow nasal cannula, which is like these are other means of delivering large amounts of oxygen besides mechanical ventilation, intubation and mechanical ventilation. And we weren't supposed to use them because we weren't supposed to use nebulizers, because the idea was that it would aerosolize the particles and thus spread around the emergency department and get the people working there infected. We quickly realized that if we did not avoid intubation at all costs, what we were doing was we were basically increasing the mortality. By the time I arrived, they'd intubated something like 200 people, and they'd only extubated 3, meaning they had put people on mechanical ventilators 200 times, and either those people had died or they were still on the mechanical ventilator, period. 3 people had been extubated. At that point in time, the mortality rate was completely unacceptable for people who reached this level of respiratory failure where they need a mechanical ventilation. And so we, and people across the country, we were like, you know what? We're already at risk of aerosolization. As I described, you look around and there's over 100 people in there with oxygen blasting into their face, and they're coughing and coughing and coughing. There was virus everywhere. So if we were going to give a little bit of another level of help, either BiPAP with a mask, kind of like a CPAP they would do for someone with sleep apnea, or some of these high flow nasal cannulas. If we were going to do that and we were going to risk a little bit more aerosolation, we were willing to take that risk, because if we were exposed, we were already exposed.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this, because a lot of the narrative that you hear on the television is that the people that are at risk are over, like, say 60, they have comorbidities. Is that what you saw, as far as like the majority of people that were sick in your hospital were elderly and people that did have other health issues?
So I'll answer that in one sec. So, because there was one other thing that everyone was worried about: mechanical ventilators. There was not a mechanical ventilator shortage. There was a high flow nasal cannula, vapotherm, which is the same thing, and a BiPAP shortage, meaning we're using these other modes of giving oxygen so that we can hopefully avoid having to intubate and mechanically ventilate someone with a ventilator. I know that Elon Musk bought a bunch of BiPAP and non-invasive positive pressure ventilation for the state of California. Everybody gave him a hard time. They said, look, you said you bought a bunch of ventilators for people. Well, he bought a bunch of BiPAP for a bunch of different hospitals around the state. Everybody was giving a hard time, and all I could think was, damn, I want more BiPAP. I want more high flow. Mm-hmm. Now, some people still are anti-BiPAP. They say it'll aerosolizes the virus. I say wear your appropriate N95 mask while you're in the hospital and you'll be fine. That's my experience and my opinion. Because it wasn't a mechanical ventilator shortage. It was this non-invasive high flow oxygen delivery systems that we were missing. And the problem was, every day I'd show up and I'd call the respiratory therapist. I'd say, how many BiPAP do we have? How many high flow? How many vapotherm? And honestly, the answer was usually, we don't have any left. They're all being used. I said, great, because the next guy who comes in respiratory failure, I'm going to have to do everything I can and hope to God I don't have to intubate him, because I know what the most likely outcome is if I do have to intubate him. Mm-hmm. And then, in regards to your question, you just asked about, comorbidities and age when it comes to people who, I guess, get into the worst sort of respiratory failure and death. And people who are older, people who have more comorbidities, are more likely to suffer increased morbidity and mortality, so worse sickness and or death. That kind of goes for all illnesses, frankly. Mm-hmm.
Well, and the reason I ask is because if you're a young, healthy doctor, that you're seeing this affect a certain demographic of people, maybe you can be a little less concerned about exposure, because it sounds like you were saying some of the treatment caused other staff members to be concerned about exposure. But if you feel like, even if worst case scenario you get this, that you'll probably be okay, did that change how you operate at all?
So I don't know, maybe now, maybe a little bit, but I'll tell you, when you're sitting there and everybody's dying around you, and there's people who die and you try to bring them back, and I don't want to be rude, but hey, someone's got to move that body. We need that bed. Mm-hmm. We need that bed. I mean, I don't mean to be callous, but those are the situations we were in, having to put people in extreme respiratory failure, sitting in a chair, watching people die before your eyes, day in and day out, day in and day out, day in and day out. It doesn't make you feel comfortable about the virus.
Yeah.
It makes you feel like you're going to die. And I mean, the first 3 days there, I'll admit, like, I was leaving in near tears, because I was like, was this the dumbest thing I ever did? Because everybody was dying. Was I next? I don't know.
Well, let me ask you this on the ventilators, because we talked about it while you were there, and I thought it was very interesting. You said the reason that intubating people becomes more dangerous is because you've taken their ability to stay hydrated and have proper electrolyte balance and proper nutrition, because now everything has to be given to them intravenously. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much all intravenously. You put a tube in their belly through their mouth, and you could give medicines that way too, but generally intravenously. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of morbidity that comes along with mechanical ventilation. It's necessary sometimes. It's a classic critical care to manage people who've been intubated and mechanically ventilated. But these folks, they weren't getting better is the problem. We don't have great treatments for this, and then we certainly didn't have any treatments at all. I mean, we were giving steroids then. We were giving Decadron then, which is shown to decrease which is shown, at least in the studies that have been done up into this time, that it's decreasing mortality in the patients who require mechanical ventilation. So it's a little bit of something. Remdesivir is an antiviral medicine, which first showed decrease in hospital stays, and now some a study showed that maybe it decreased in mortality too. But there's nothing that can really treat this, so you couldn't really stop the progression of the disease. And it becomes complicated, and it becomes very resource intensive to do mechanical ventilation.
So the reality of everything you guys were kind of doing there, for just lack of a better word, is kind of trial by error, huh?
Trial by error, doing our best. I mean, we take care of a lot of sick people all the time. Not this many not in this volume, really ever. I mean, the only thing I could compare it to was during the battle for Mosul was horrible levels of traumatic illness that could be overwhelming at times. But I've never seen anything like this. And now that I've seen this, I can imagine worse. But we don't want this. We don't want this elsewhere, because it's ugly. But so I never felt super comfortable about, like, I don't want to be exposed. And I've said to you a bunch of times, like, I don't want this. I don't want this disease. And I've been tested for it and been negative. I had my antibodies tested, they were negative. I don't think that says, with 100% certainty that I have or have not certainly been exposed and or actually had active illness. I don't think I had active illness when I got tested negative for the disease. But I don't want it. Do I feel a little bit more comfortable now? Yeah, I've seen so much of it in so many varying degrees, from asymptomatic to what appears to be kind of a flu-like illness, although it's different, up to severe respiratory failure and death. I guess I probably feel a little bit more comfortable that most likely I wouldn't die, but I certainly don't want to head down that path, because I also realize that if it got really bad, there's not a whole lot that can be done. Like, I have a nurse that I worked with who died. She was fine. She got sick, got a flu-like illness for a while, went to respiratory failure, died. Was on the mechanical ventilator in the ICU and died.
Was that out at New York?
Nah, that one was in Arizona, but there were nurses in New York City that died too, and another ER. I don't know any docs. Oh, I do know one doc who's sick in the ICU right now. I got a doc in one of the hospitals I worked at in Miami who's sick in the ICU right now. I know through friends, other so 1 degree of separation of their friends who are ER docs and ICU docs, and a couple other specialties who've gotten sick, got in the ICU. A lot of them have lived. Some have had ECMO, which is kind of like bypass for the lungs. When your lungs are not working, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, ECMO is the acronym. It's when mechanical ventilation isn't doing it and you can't do gas exchange. You can put on this machine, which is incredibly resource intensive and comes with a lot of risks. But if it's your only option when your lungs just simply aren't working, you can use this and hopefully allow time for your lungs to start to work again, and hopefully take you off of that and be able to wean yourself from mechanical ventilation would be the goal. There was an ER doc in Washington State when it hit Washington State, which was very early on, and then Washington State had a shutdown. But he was young, in his 40s, got intubated, sent to a tertiary care facility in Seattle and placed on ECMO, and was on ECMO for a while and eventually extubated, and thank God he's alive.
So the reality is the people on the front lines are getting exposed, and it is killing them. And like, you've seen it within your own peer group. So I think that's an important thing to touch on, because like I said, the virus has been so politicized that there's a lot of people that just want to kind of downplay it to a point. And then there's other people I feel like want to upplay it and make it seem like a bigger deal than it is. And man, you've been there and you've seen it, and it's happening. So
yeah, it's very interesting. I try not to pay too much attention to the politics.
It's unavoidable lately, I feel like.
Yeah, you can't turn on your cell phone without it.
Well, no, so that brings me to another point, because I feel like everything from ways to prevent it with the mask or social distancing to different treatment methods, it's all right versus left now. And I remember I asked you about the hydroxychloroquine thing, because on the right, they were saying, hey, this is viable treatment. And then you saw the president get demonized because he said he thought it was a viable option. And I asked you about it and you're like, no, these are the facts on hydroxychloroquine. And once you broke it down, it's like, oh, okay, this makes sense hearing it from somebody that has been there, someone that's tried it, someone that's administered it, versus what you hear in a Fox News snippet and coming from someone that's not a doctor. And then I'm listening to it again, somebody else that's not a doctor. And I just think it gets very easy for things to get very convoluted. So
for the public. Man.
Yeah, exactly. If you would you mind unpacking that a little bit and just kind of sharing what you thought?
So at first, during the peak in New York City, there was a study out of France by a well-known French researcher. It was a pretty small study, and it showed that it was hydroxychloroquine, or it might have been hydroxychloroquine with something else, and it looked like it did well for coronavirus. But then all the follow-up studies, that was very small and pretty nearly anecdotal. And then the other studies just kind of showed that it didn't really do anything. There were some that were a little bit positive, some that weren't. It basically said, look, let's keep looking. It's
not the answer.
This is certainly not. It's not the answer. It's far from a silver bullet. But everybody was using it. We were trying because we didn't have anything else. We were just doing regular care. I mean, the thing that we were instinctually using was steroids, which now, after many months, have shown that they do, in some populations, appear to decrease mortality.
So, I mean, maybe you don't even know, but if you had to speculate, why do you think that was a treatment option that everybody just clung to and it became like the focal point of everybody?
Because in vitro, it showed antiviral properties. So, and not in a body, but in a petri dish, it showed antiviral properties. And so it's been used for a lot of things. It was pretty darn safe. So it does have its side effects. But I don't give it to anybody anymore. At all. And I haven't for months and months. I only did for a little, like, days when we didn't know anything else. When the data started coming out, that was like, look, let's move on. It was like, okay, we're done.
Okay.
There's probably people still giving it. I'm not. And I still see coronavirus all the time.
Something that you touched on the other night was explaining to my wife why you think that kids don't get it. And I thought that was a very interesting conversation.
So, I guess in short is...
or in long, dude. We got 5 hours on this SD card.
Your kids don't get it because they're so cute, man.
Yeah.
No, so I do think some kids get it, but kids don't get really sick, I think, because they have a immunity to coronavirus, likely through their thymus and their high level of T cells. I think there's a primary T cell mediated immunity for coronavirus. And as we grow older, our thymus gets smaller and we have less T cells. And little kids, they're getting coronavirus all the time, different kinds of coronaviruses all the time in their common cold. And so I do believe that they probably have some already pre-existing recent immunity to coronavirus over the last couple of years, and different coronaviruses, which are likely working against this one. That's why I think children are not particularly getting. However, nowadays there's a few studies that have come out that show sending people back to school. A few of them have it, they spread it, they all end up getting it. Little kids, thank God, they can get illness from this that is severe, but I clinically and personally have not seen any severe illness from it in children. I haven't even seen severe illness in anyone under the age of 18. But after a certain age, I mean, I think that they're spreading it too. I don't know how much. I can't claim to be any sort of expert on how they are going to contribute to like the spread of coronavirus and what sort of impact that could have.
Well, you hear it I mean, it makes sense that the information changes all the time because it's so new. But you hear like children can spread it, children can't spread it. Asymptomatic people can, asymptomatic people can't. And so here we are 6 months into this thing, and it just seems like there's a lot of unclear answers, misinformation. And here we are in September. School started today back in Washington State, and Washington State decided to continue to keep the school shut down. So my girls all started today on Zoom, and it can be frustrating as a parent because our children clearly aren't getting the kind of education that they need. But at the same time, I hear your stories, and it gives a lot of validity to the social distancing and to attempting to keep people apart and all the stuff that you have talked about that's not agenda driven, that's not politically driven. And so I remember you said, and this was a couple months back, you're like, either this virus is going to have some type of life cycle where it burns itself out, or everybody will probably end up getting it sooner or later.
Yeah, and I at that point in time, I thought everybody will probably just get it. The question is, do they get it, and are they immune? Just recently in the news, they said, oh, the first person to get it twice. No, somebody got it twice, a long time ago, or it just never went away.
Well, what do you mean by that? So, because I've heard people state similar things about somebody got it twice or herd immunity. I mean, do they know how that all works yet? Do they have an understanding of how it works?
There's a lot of people who have ideas. Has it been is there a consensus agreement about it in the medical community? No.
Okay.
I mean, this thing's come on so quick. It's unlike anything I've seen in my medical career. That's for sure. I mean, they present differently than anything I've seen. The closest thing, people will chastise me perhaps for this, but the closest thing is it does look like horrible influenza. That's the closest thing I can relate it to, but
and are you just saying simply symptoms and how people
the
present?
Sick ones look like, yeah, it presents differently. It spreads a little differently. It seems to spread pretty quickly. I have no idea if they should open schools. I have no idea if this 6-foot thing is a good idea or a bad idea. Should we wear masks? Should we not wear masks? I mean, I wear an N95 mask when I go. I mean, I fly all the time. I'm going to go on a flight later today. I'm going to wear an N95 mask from the time I walk into the airport to the time I get out.
Well, and you told me, and it was probably a month or two ago, where you're like, I don't want this. And when I'm in public, I have a mask on. Oh, yeah.
And I work all the time or I spend my time outside. So hasn't affected my life in a horrible way like it has changed some other people's lives. I don't have any children. I'm not married. So I go to work all the time in different emergency departments.
You hear that, ladies? He's not married.
I go to work and I've got my regular emergency department patients that I've seen different kinds of a long time. You always see new things, always learn new things. But then I've got coronavirus, which I've gained some experience in taking care of. So I go to work. I wear an N95 at work all day. I go in the other room to eat. I used to wear one of those masks with the exhalation valve. I didn't know that at the time. You're not supposed to do that apparently, because maybe if you have it, you'll spread it. However, I have no reason to believe I have it or have ever had it. But
well, I guess different environments would also call for perhaps a different mask. I mean,
yeah,
if
we're not wearing a mask right now.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're in an emergency department with 189 sick people, you're the one that's concerned about getting it.
Certainly.
Not necessarily giving it to other people, right?
Yeah, roger that. It's well, now I don't wear that mask. I guess I just didn't know the difference. Because we very rarely have to wear N95s in my regular practice of emergency medicine. It's kind of new, frankly. We've used them plenty, but not much. I can't remember the last time I had to wear an N95 prior to coronavirus. Yeah, I have no idea if I don't want to get it. Do I think that you shouldn't spend time with your family? No, I think that's crazy. I think you should spend time with your family. And those people close to you.
Well, and I think that's why this is so frustrating to people, because it's so bizarre that the kind of the standards that the government has come up with, and then trying to implement those standards that are kind of convoluted and not necessarily rooted in science. Like, for example, me, Brian, and my wife went out to dinner. What was that? 2 days ago, and we took my 3 children, and we got to the restaurant, and they said 2 of your children have to sit by themselves. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? We're all staying in the same house. We're all around each other all the time. And they said governor's order is maximum of 5 people at a table. And so you can see why that's frustrated, because my 5 and 8-year-old had to sit at a different table, and anyone with kids knows what a nightmare that can become.
It's creating mayhem.
Yeah, they're over there and they're crying and they're mad about this. And it's just, when you take a step back and you detach from the emotional side or the political side of coronavirus, there's a lot of things going on that just don't make sense.
Yeah, I'd like to say that everyone, hey man, just have some common sense. But the question then remains, whoa, what's common sense regarding this? Like, it's kind of hard to tell. Like, I'm developing my own common sense, but I've seen so much of it. It's probably a little bit mature than some other common sense, which if you're getting so much misinformation from the media and the social media, agenda-driven information, then you're getting 2 different messages, if not 100 different messages, which is clearly making some people frustrated. It's sad. I mean, if people are going to, if different companies and or governments or whatever are going to enforce this, they should just, honestly, I'd say they'd get a lot farther if they just did it with some level of kindness. Like, for instance, when we went out to eat, I mean, yeah, they're like, okay, they need to sit over here, but little kids, they don't know what they have to do. They come and jump on your laps, so we're all sitting at the same table.
Yeah.
And I'll give it to them for being kind and not saying your little child needs to go sit over there. No, they just let us be. And that's because if they had done that, I mean, we probably would have just said, okay, fine, we're out. We're leaving. You're not going to let my 5-year-old doesn't know any better. Okay.
Yeah. And inevitably, I feel like what we consume as a consumer and what media we watch is going to be kind of directly related to kind of what side of the fence we're on. And as a conservative person and someone that leans more to the right, when I look through my feed based on the people that I follow and the people that I support, I'm seeing more of a conservative side and more conservative perspectives. But then you start to see like people talking about the mask as like, hey, this is like government new world order. They're trying to cover our faces to take away our identities. And they're trying to basically, like, it's the first step to imprisoning us and making us sheep. And I'll tell you what, it doesn't matter how crazy stuff is. When you watch enough of it and you hear enough people talking about it, you start to wonder like, yeah, that kind of is what's going on.
They can't even do facial recognition as well like this, though.
That's true, right? But then when I hear my best friend come into town and be like, no, bro, listen, I watched 100 people die last week, and we believe at the hospital that having the proper facial protection does prevent the spread of the virus. And it's like, oh, okay. So
I certainly think the N95 does. But again, like you mentioned, I'm surrounded by sick people. And then everybody who comes to the emergency department, when I start, at first they were like, anybody who we think might have coronavirus, that's when you need to wear your N95. And then there's all sorts of other personal protective equipment, PPE. I believe in the N95 in that setting. They'd say, oh, you need to wear it when they're suspected. And I said, look, sometimes we don't know. I'm going to assume every single patient, and now this is a self-selecting population, these are the sick people in society that are coming to the emergency department, every patient should be assumed to have it. And if you don't want to get it, you need to wear your N95. And I mean, I spread that information, and happily the hospital I worked at, they changed the protocol. And so if you're in a clinical area, you have to wear N95. So you're with any patient wearing an N95, because anybody might have it, especially people presenting to an emergency department for whatever problem. I mean, I don't know about the masks in public, or what kind of masks work best or don't work. You do get a whole bunch of different information out there. I mean, some I scoff at, and some I'm like.
Well, one thing that you said that I think is key is you said, I think the government could have presented it in a kinder manner. And I've been saying that from the beginning because, and I don't know about the other states, but Washington State our governor got on television and he's like, not wearing a mask is going to be considered a misdemeanor. And I mean, we're Americans, right? As soon as you start to direct people under the threat of force, it's just human nature. There's a certain percentage of people that are going to be like, oh yeah, watch this. I don't have to do what you tell me. And I mean, that is what it is. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, but I mean, that's my initial kind of feeling too. Like, don't get on here and threaten me with me becoming a criminal. I think we would have a lot more success if a governor would get on television and present it like this. Say, hey, listen, guys, this is new. We have a lot of doctors and scientists that think this is probably the best course of action to take. And I'm pleading with you guys. What we know right now says we should be doing this. So let's try this. If in 6 months this proves to not have been the best method, I apologize. All we can do is move forward with what we believe is going to be the safest and most efficient way to stop the spread of it, and come at it like at a nonpartisan, non-biased approach, and kind of show the humanity of this, and like that we're actually in this to try and help people prevent people from getting sick, you know? And I just don't feel like we're getting that at all.
I don't disagree with you there.
And then the other thing that we continue to see is like when our politicians are making errors in judgment and how they handle this, no one has the humility to just say, hey, my bad. Like this is as new for me as it is for you. And I'm in a position where people are looking at me for answers. And based on X, Y, and Z, we decided to do this. And you know what? It may not have been the best course of action. So, I mean, that's politicians 101. It doesn't matter if it's coronavirus or anything else. You're not going to hear that out of them.
Probably not. I mean, it would be a refreshing if you did.
One thing you said the other day, you were talking about some of the studies they were finding blood clots in different organs.
Yeah, they did autopsies on people who died.
Get a little closer to the mic here.
People who died secondary coronavirus, and they have like microthrombi and some macrothrombi. So some microthrombi, like you look at you do an autopsy and you cut their organs and you look at them with your eyes and or with microscopes, and you can see a bunch of blood clots that are small in different areas, which are causing, and you certainly do see this. This is an inflammatory response to a virus that is infecting the cells of a human body, and that happens. The issue is that the inflammatory response is profound in the lungs, and some of that inflammatory response initiates in some folks the coagulation cascade, which is going to cause clotting. And in some folks we have seen, there's sort of microthrombi everywhere, which is causing organ dysfunction, aka so in the setting of quote unquote organ dysfunction in the lungs, you can end up with respiratory failure. You can also get this, say, in your kidneys, and you can start to have acute kidney injury or acute renal failure. And all of these things kind of compound on one another. If you have one organ going bad and another one starts to go bad too, it's more of a problem, to speak plainly. And then they also appear to have a higher risk of clots in their veins and other locations. And anecdotally, I've seen, anecdotally and in some public research, we see clots forming in the arterial side, which are causing strokes in young people, as well as clots in some of the distal arterial vasculature. I saw a wild case with an aortic occlusion, as well as a bunch of deep venous thromboses. So thrombus in the arterial system, the venous system, that went up into the lungs, causing pulmonary emboli. And then a group at New York published a case series with 6 folks who were real young, who had positive COVID, who had strokes, which is basically in this setting, it appears to be a blood clot in the left side of the heart that goes up into the brain, causing a stroke.
And I know some of my friends that, like jiu-jitsu guys, that are young and healthy, but they don't want to train right now. And I've had some people express that kind of stuff. They're like, listen, I'm not necessarily worried about coronavirus being fatal to me, but they're worried about the other side effects that some people say like it may have like a lifelong effect on your lungs or your other organs.
Yeah, and some people are saying your brain these days. I mean, I certainly think that it could. I mean, it could. Not it could. I mean, in some people, it 100% will, assuming they survive.
Mm-hmm.
But not in everyone. Not in everyone who, like an asymptomatic carrier, he or she is unlikely to suffer a long-term consequence in this unless it sits back and comes back again. But if someone gets sick from it, when I say sick, I mean they actually get truly ill and or like require medical attention, it could hurt and inflame a part of their lung, which will never fully get back to normal, and or other organs. I mean, I haven't reviewed all of the data, but I mean, I've seen people who it affects them for months and months, and I've seen what I believe on imaging and clinically to be there's going to be problems in these people's lungs for a long time, if not forever. I mean, certainly can cause a problem. Is that going to happen in most people? I certainly hope not, and I don't think so. I really think that there's a smaller percentage of people that are having a really negative outcome from this. But as I mentioned before, so I mean, the hospital systems were completely and utterly overwhelmed, which does not necessarily lead to the best overall care for the populace. In fact, quite the opposite, most likely. And if everyone were to get it, then that problem is going to be more noticeable in wherever you live. But most people are, hope to God, and it appears so, are going to be fine.
So I know like everybody was talking about flattening the curve. And I think everyone was kind of under the idea that once the curve was flattened, that we could go back to normal life.
It was something that was a wonderful, the slogan, the flatten the curve slogan, very interesting. The thing is that curve, flatten it, open up, it comes right back. It's very, some of the stuff that in New York City though, so the curve went huge. It was horrible. There were 1,000 people a day dying in New York City. And the peak was quite steep. And then, in New York City now, it got, after the very end of my time there, it almost felt like, wow, is it gone? Is it really gone right now? It felt like it was gone. It was so rare that we'd have someone in a like bad respiratory failure showing up to the emergency department. You'd see a bunch of smoldering coronavirus cases who they'd had it for a long time. They were having headaches and or some smaller sequelae of the disease. So it was kind of gone after.
When you say gone, in relation to like the timeline, like when you showed up and you said 100 people a day are dying.
I mean, you can look at if we had if you had the death rates and or hospitalization rates plotted out over time, you can see that it was quite a peak and that it came down. I don't know the exact.
I mean, I guess we correlate that to shutting the city down.
I think that's probably correct. Yeah. They did. They stopped the sub. I'm not sure if they totally stopped the subway or not, but I mean, people stayed home, and other people who could leave the city, they left the city, and so human to human interaction was very much decreased.
Another thing that you see on your feed all the time, and I don't know if there's a validity to it or not, which is why I'm asking, like, oh, my uncle died in a motorcycle wreck and his death certificate said COVID-19.
That sounds a bit fishy to me.
Well, and so that's what I'm asking, like a medical professional's opinion on that stuff.
If the guy had respiratory failure and coronavirus and went out and rode his motorcycle and crashed it and unfortunately died, maybe it had something to do with it. But I mean, I don't know. I think that's sensationalism.
Yeah.
I think that any article like that is sensationalism. I mean, no one could tell me as a physician what I need to write as a diagnosis. But mind you, I'm a physician. I don't write death certificates, but I guess some do. I don't. I never written a death certificate in my entire time practicing. I've seen a lot of people die, but I do write the diagnosis, my diagnosis for the patient.
Well, one thing that was going around, and maybe you've seen or have some insight on this as well, is that there was federal grant money going around. And if a hospital had someone that was diagnosed with COVID-19, this much money would come in. And if a hospital had a COVID-19 death, this much additional money would come in. Do you know if there's any validity to any of that stuff, or who knows?
I honestly have no idea. I heard the rumors too, but I don't. And anybody I work with clinically doesn't make a dime more because they treated coronavirus or not. Mind you, just doctors, nurses, and technicians and janitors.
Yeah. Yeah.
We aren't controlling the money.
All right. So the next controversial thing I'll ask you is everybody's wondering about a vaccine. Do you have any opinion on that? Like if a viable one's being developed, and what your thoughts are or perspectives on that?
I would say that there's probably more money in research effort in coming up with a vaccine for this than, I guess, I don't know, but probably more than any other disease ever, and certainly in such a short period of time. So I think there's a number of different vaccines. The ones that are in everybody's face is the Novavax vaccine, the Moderna. There's a few others.
And those were created specifically for this? Okay.
For coronavirus, for SARS-CoV-2. All of the large pharma sort of have their hands in some of this. And they made deals already with, I'm not sure if it's hundreds of millions or billions of dollars worth of vaccines. They've already cut contracts with different governments, including the United States and governments around the globe. Mr. Putin and the Russians said that they have a vaccine already. I know the Chinese are making one too. Everybody's trying to figure it out. It's a great idea. It'd be really nice if this wasn't a problem. I hope it works. I hope one of them works and doesn't have a whole bunch of negative side effects. I mean, I think the vaccines we have, like in our medical system in the United States, we recommend as a medical community nearly universally to vaccinate our children for a number of different communicable illnesses. Decreases 100% chance that decreases morbidity and mortality throughout the United States, and leads to the preservation of life in children and adults. It's great. If this, I'd like to believe that if the FDA allows one of these vaccines to get through, that it will have no long-term side effects, and it would work. Like I won't be the first to get it, that's for sure.
I know, and
won't be the last either.
You being someone that's traveled all around the world, like, and I've traveled quite a bit myself. Like a lot of times you have to present a shot record just to go into, if you're going to Africa or different places, you have to show that you've had these vaccinations just to go there. So I know like a lot of people are freaked out about a vaccine becoming mandatory, but I don't think mandatory vaccination means like they're going to line you up under the threat of force and make you get it. It's like, if you want to be able to travel and have free reign of wherever, like that may be a requirement. And the strange thing about that is that's already being implemented for a lot of places.
I've thought about that when it comes to travel too. So right now with, like you mentioned, so yellow fever to go to different places. And I think you have to be the West Nile virus vaccination as well. And some people like to get rabies when they go different places. I'm sure the military makes you get a bunch of different vaccines if you travel to different developing countries. I mean, I get those if I have to. I've got the yellow fever vaccine. Right now they're trying to do these rapid testings for positive or not positive coronavirus for some travel. It is not only probably becoming somewhat political, but also different companies want that test available and different companies don't. Some airlines probably don't want, if they test everyone and how many people are positive, then that many people, what do they have to give them a refund? So there's all sorts of players in this that have their own personal agenda.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm the first to tell you, like, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Like, I do believe, we cured smallpox and polio and whatnot with vaccinations. But at the other side of the coin is, I don't feel like pumping a bunch of stuff into my kids when they are not even at risk in the first place. So I get that as well, you know?
We'll see how good it gets. I mean, if there's something that's, time will tell. Time will tell.
Do you have any idea what a normal timeline
A
on
normal
a vaccination
timeline on
even
these
is?
vaccines is years to come up with one. I mean, now they're talking about maybe the end of 2020, 2021. They're certainly rushing things, but nobody wants, none of the large pharmaceutical companies that are going to be playing a role in the creation and distribution of a vaccine. Nobody wants to hurt people. Of course, they want to make money, but they don't want to hurt people because that will not.
Yeah, it's not going to be a sustainable source of income.
Model.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can only wish the best. I mean, there's certainly a lot of people, a lot of money, a lot of people, a lot of energy to try and get that out there, basically to get life back to normal, because clearly life has become quite strange. And it's, it seems to be causing a global detriment, certainly for the economy.
Well, it's causing a global detriment in everything.
Yeah, people aren't being as nice to one another. I traveled around and I worked in New York City, and I've been in a number of different states, and in some places everyone's really reasonable. They're super kind and nice. Maybe it's just the local culture. They're kind of nice about, hey, wear your vaccine or wear your mask, and you can sit over there, and no one's giving you a hard time. They make life easy. Life's going as back to normal as possible, and everybody's being kind and enjoying it. And then I've gone other places where, everyone's yelling and screaming at one another about whether or not they're wearing the right mask. Is it left or right? Is it upside down? Are you standing too close to your work colleague? And I think some people should just get back to humanity and be kind to one another.
Like REI in Seattle. We can call them out. I mean, I went there the other day and it was exactly right. Like, there was a guy out front that I don't know if he's part of REI's coronavirus enforcement task force, but exactly right. Just being rude as shit to people, screaming. And you came over a few hours later and happened to stop by the same store yourself, and that was the first story you told me. And it's funny because we experienced the same thing 2 hours earlier, and really, what are you getting out of that? Like what are they benefiting from treating people like that? I just feel like that's the quickest way to get pushback and not allow people to kind of get on board with what you're trying to push. Is treating them like shit. They should just be. It's human interaction. Human interaction 101
in some people. Yeah, kindness, understanding, humility.
And then the other side of it is like, we're out hiking 25 miles out into the wilderness, and people will walk by, and they're kind of apprehensive to talk to you. Or we had one guy like pull a mask up real quick as we were approaching, and it's like, I mean, to each his own. You do what you feel is necessary to protect yourself. But
maybe he had coronavirus and he was protecting us.
Yeah, I suppose. But I just feel like, I don't know, man, like it's easy to take it too far and like kind of lose touch with your humanity as well.
I think people are fighting there's so much argument and there's so much abrasiveness in society, or maybe it's just being played up by the media, but I mean, it's a time of challenge, and everybody should just try to get along and do what's right for one another and just be freaking kind to one another. Everybody's just people out here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I know a group in locally to where we're at in Washington that hit me up, and they're like, hey, we're going to get 200 people and we're going to go shopping, and we're not going to wear a mask. We're going to show them that we don't have to wear a mask. And it's like, listen, I agree. I mean, I think everybody listening knows that I don't like the government telling me what to do, and I don't like the government infringing on people's rights. Like, that's the whole reason this podcast even came into existence, right? But by getting 200 people to go into a store without a mask on, there's a lot of people that are going to find themselves in a fearful place because of 200 people doing that. There's a lot of people that are going to feel like they're being put at risk because of people doing that. And regardless if that's true or if it's not true, that's going to be those people's perception. And I don't feel like the best way to bridge the gap between people that are supporters of masks being implemented and people that are not, is just by rushing in there and just this, we don't have to do this and we're not gonna, and watch this. Like, I just don't feel like you're gonna bridge any gaps with that approach. I thought that was kind of strange.
It sounds like people trying to cause a problem or cause a scene, or maybe they're just trying to.
They said they want to show what normal looks like, but
I remember
things aren't normal right now, so we probably can't show what normal looks like,
Things are definitely not normal. And, you mentioned that apparently it's a misdemeanor not to wear a mask. That's real interesting.
That's what was put out, but
whether or not that's being enforced,
I don't think there's any enforcement on that. I mean, as we know, the current climate of law enforcement is already in a very tarnished position.
Yeah, unfortunate for them at the time.
Having
tough to do that job right now.
Yeah, to have officers go out there and do mask enforcement is something that's not going to go over well,
That would be a horrible.
So what else you got on it? Is there anything else, like, from your experience or from your treatment, or things that are just kind of intriguing to share with people that you could help?
So that I can help.
Just help people develop perspective and kind of look at things from a perspective from someone that's been there and done that and lived it. That's not politically driven, or, I mean, like you said, you don't make any more or less money. Big pharma's not padding your pocket. Like, none of the conspiracies that float around on a day-to-day basis apply when you're just looking at the physician that you interact with when you walk through the doors of the hospital,
There's no real good treatment for someone who's asymptomatic and or just has some body aches, chills, and a cough right now. A pulse oximeter is a great way to determine how severe, if you did have coronavirus, how severe it is. If you're wearing a pulse oximeter, which is something you put on your finger, and it measures the oxygen saturation, carrying capacity of your blood. So therefore, it's kind of telling you how well your lungs are doing their job. If you wear that around and you're above 90, 92%, then you're doing great. You should probably not try and spread it if you do have it or you think you have it. You should stay away until you're better. You can call I believe physicians are doing all sorts of virtual meetings these days. You go talk to them, but you could have that. I mean, if your oxygen saturation is getting below 92, 90%, I mean, then you're starting to kind of potentially require some oxygen to try and decrease the likelihood that you have a negative outcome in the long term. I mean, we, like you mentioned, climbing Rainier or climbing Denali or Aconcagua or all these other high altitude mountains. I mean, your oxygen saturations do go that low, but it's probably not good for you. You don't want it to be that low. You don't want it to get worse. A lot of people in the news, they talked about you can take these patients and put them on their belly and put them in the prone position. And it does. It changes the distribution of blood in their lungs, and therefore the gas exchange in their lungs may improve lying on your stomach for a long period of time. A lot of my friends in the paramedics and EMTs in the pre-hospital setting, a couple of them got coronavirus. They're exposed all the time. They got sick, and they would sit at home and just lay on their belly because their oxygen saturation on their pulse ox was better when they did that. So they'd lay there for 6 hours every day just so that they could spend a longer time with a better oxygen saturation. It made them feel better, so they didn't have headaches and body aches as bad.
So if it makes you feel better, it's probably a decent thing to do, yeah?
Yeah. In most aspects, if it feels good, do it.
Yeah, we've been living by that motto since we were 16, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I know you mentioned a lot of people are now reluctant to come to the ER with other illnesses because they're fearful of being in contact with coronavirus. Do you have anything to share with that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, and I can really only speak anecdotally, meaning only from my experience, which is sometimes some of the worst information people can get. But they're looking into this. So they're saying, okay, because when coronavirus got really bad in the United States, no one wanted to go to the emergency department because I'm assuming this is why no one wanted to go to the emergency department, because they thought that maybe there was a lot of coronavirus there. And the true fact is that in the vast majority of the United States, this made the numbers of people coming to the emergency department quite low. It decreased our census. very significantly, to where nurses, technicians, doctors were either getting less work and or being laid off, which decreased. I mean, the companies that manipulate all the money for those organizations, they cut work, they cut pay. It did not improve not only were we faced with coronavirus on the front lines, but also now we're being faced with cut hours and cut money, just like the rest of community, despite the fact that we're quote unquote essential. That was the vast majority of the United States. And so throughout...
So you can see why it becomes so frustrating, because you got these pockets where it is blowing up and it's very real. And then, but like you said, the majority of the United States, a lot of the hospitals are laying people off because it's just a ghost town in there.
Yeah, total.
I was a police officer still when this was all kicking off, and I worked a shift at UW Medical Center, and I was talking to some of the doctors and nurses there, and I guess they built like a huge tent out front to be able to have more beds if they started to get overwhelmed. And they're like, we don't have anyone here with coronavirus. And what they explained to me was, they said all of the elective surgeries were shut down, and that's what makes the OR all of its money. And the hospital overall, that's kind of what generates revenue. They said the OR generates revenue and the ER drains your money and your resources. So when you're running your ER and not your OR, it's basically not sustainable.
Yeah, that
is that kind of a
it's
good...
not it's a pretty good representation, although the ER doesn't always lose money. The ER can make a lot of money too, but it's generally a lot of the hospital's income is from surgery, a great deal of it. Certainly elective surgeries, which were canceled, so only emergent surgeries were being performed. Was that good or bad? I don't know. It's hard for you to believe that it's certainly bad in some circumstances and maybe good in others.
And it'll be hard to ever quantify that, because who knows what the outcome was of the measures that were implemented or were not,
I saw, so in the emergency department in Arizona, everything was normal. The ER was super busy, but then coronavirus became this thing. And then all of a sudden the censuses started dropping. It was like, wow, what's going on? But had they shut the city down yet or not? They hadn't, but the numbers were still down. And then they shut the city down once people in the county started getting positive for coronavirus. And then it really went down. And it was really interesting. So the question was everyone staying home, not moving around, not doing anything, not driving their cars, not out getting their lungs full of smoke in the community? Were they just sitting at home and therefore not getting sick? Or were they scared to come to the ER? I think it's likely when everyone's sitting at home, when people are doing less things and they're being more domestic and are not moving around as much, maybe they don't get as sick. I don't know really way to tell. And then the question, so which part of it is it? Are we missing heart attacks? There's a lot of people who say that people are sitting at home because they're having chest pain, but they don't want to go to the emergency department. Maybe they had a heart attack, which is going to they would have had a better outcome had they come to the emergency department and been treated by modern medicine that is the United States medical system. I think both are true. I do think that it has intimidated some people, and it's a strange phenomenon that we're facing. There's also some people that utilize the emergency department the totally wrong way, and there are
There's hypochondriacs.
There's all sorts of people who abuse the emergency department, although there's a whole lot of people that benefit greatly from presentation to emergency departments in the United States of America. So it was a very interesting time, because for the fear of coronavirus and or people not moving around, the numbers came really, really low. And then since the numbers were low, the state opened things up again. And all of a sudden the ER started getting busy, but it didn't appear to be coronavirus that it was getting busy. But then the coronavirus sort of caught up a little while later, and then they shut the city down again. And then it still had this delayed effect from this whole what I'm assuming is this big movement around and a lot of interpersonal interactions. And all of a sudden coronavirus started coming, patients started rising. The other patients came down. And then after a while of keeping things kind of quiet in the community, those coronavirus cases sort of dipped off. So I've seen waves of it, and I can anecdotally correlate them to sort of, quote unquote, shutting down society or putting limits on personal interaction in society. I don't know what works, what doesn't work.
Well, one thing you'll be happy to hear that supposedly works is that if you're rioting or looting, there's no correlation to a spike in coronavirus with those activities. That's according to the Washington state government, at least. No comment.
I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah.
I've seen a few protests in New York City during the time there. And I saw on the news a whole bunch of rioting, and that's a shame.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic that we can reserve for next time. All right. Well, we just did an hour and 20 minutes. I think we went through a lot of information. Is there anything else that you think would just be beneficial to share with your perspectives on all this stuff? You can say no.
Yeah. I don't know. Let's just be good to one another. That's all.
All right. Yeah, I think, again, I just wanted to get you on here because there's so much misinformation and there's so much stuff that's just, it's clearly agenda driven. And there'll be people that listen to this and be like, I mean, there's people saying that I am a paid actor and that I was never a cop. So, I mean, no matter what you do, there's people on the fringes that think it's all bullshit. And there'll probably be people saying that you were paid by Big Pharma to say the things that you were saying. But for the majority of people that are listening that have common sense and are reasonable human beings, I can assure you, Brian's been, like I said, my best friend since we were 12 years old. We've went through hell together. We've done a lot of awesome shit together. We've had some crazy ups and downs. And I know that the words that are coming out of his mouth are based on one thing and one thing only. And that is just taking care of people and trying to see people live healthy, happy lives. And so I appreciate you coming on, man. And, this will probably be one of those episodes where there's a lot of questions and a lot of people wanting to just kind of get some follow-up information. So we'll try and interact with you guys on that in the comments and whatnot. But I appreciate you listening. And if you got nothing else?
Nah, man. Thanks for having me on.
All right, then that'll be a wrap. All right. We'll see you later, guys.